Yeah, go on the line.
What's the most exciting brand project?
That's the one that's ended.
So what happens? I was at a different conference about a year ago.
You know, let me go on the action. Let me go on the
And it's not necessarily a brand project, but I saw how AI was being used by organisations like the UN in order to combat chemical police negotiations. So I'm going bigger than brand, I'm going more about AI being used here, how different factions who are at war use AI to find out the sentiment.
Oh, do you have to create another link in order to make it happen?
What's the right prompts in these negotiations as to the different warring sides and sentiments out there.
It's not even showing anything this time.
In the press.
Wait, hold on. The same thing, right? I'm gonna have to open my laptop.
I'm curious to find that, who needs to keep those learning out years and years. So those years into learning to have come out their thoughts on their career to actually learn a little bit more about those technologies. I think we need to let each other's languages. Absolutely. Because I do think the engineers need to understand how what they do is used. I do think those who are creative need to understand how things are built. And we always want the whole brain organizations to learn to affect the right brain and the whole brain and the both is learning how to design. So I was just giving you the call so I can have another question for you. What's the hope that you see for AI? What's the hope that you see? My hope is that we still see brilliant humans working with AI to create fantastic, relevant stories. And that's it for us.
No. I didn't bring my laptop. I brought an iPad.
Wow, today's really full of amazing sessions, honestly. We're going to move on to something that's probably coming up in your conversations a little bit now, DEI. Obviously there's a lot of changes that are happening across the globe, and this one's definitely important for our community. Across industries, DEI communities and commitments are slipping. And our next panel of brilliant women is here to impact exactly why and what we can do about it. Okay, so I would like to welcome to the stage, not yet, but very shortly, yeah, just bringing you lot up to speed. At 2:55, we're gonna have Yasmin Abdul-Magid and co. Guys, I'll see you in a minute.
target, right? You know.
I don't think change the game.
Welcome into the stage. I want some applause, guys. Let's wake up.
On the space, take off the biggest step ever. Hello everybody and welcome to this discussion on the DEI pushback. thrilled to be joined by Abele, Ava, and Yasmin, and we're going to get into it. To begin with, I'm just going to set the scene, figure out where we've been for the last 5 years and where we are now before we dig into some questions. So, needless to say that since the election of Donald Trump at the beginning of this year, DEI has been under assault, and it's been in existence for some time before that as well. And what was once a kind of flourishing moment in time, sadly as a result of the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police, and the kind of subsequent Black Lives Matter uprisings, is almost a distant memory, to be quite honest. Now, despite some of this originating under Trump and in the US, when the US catches a cold, when the US sneezes, the UK catches a cold. It's got immense economic and cultural power, and we're in many ways following in those footsteps at this time. So while George Floyd wasn't the first and has not been the last black person murdered by police in the US, the kind of work of the Black Lives Matter movement galvanized people around the world, to be honest, and corporations at that time listened. So to give you an example of what was going on that will be familiar to many of you, we had Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase Bank, taking a knee, a posture and a symbol adopted by Black Panthers and other civil rights leaders, and then kind of reignited by Colin Kaepernick in 2016. And we had huge amounts of money allegedly being dedicated towards Black lives. Now, at one point, it was $49 billion that corporate America had allocated to this cause. But when the Washington Post dug in, they discovered that only 1% of it was actually going to the causes that the Black Lives Matter movement was advocating for with respect to police and criminal justice reform. The rest of it was all going to corporate loans that these banks were making. So there are a couple of things that we can take as a conclusion from this before we dig into some questions, which is that one, a lot of what's been going on for the last 5 years that got us here is symbolic gestures over material change. And that two, the business case for diversity that has been pushed for at least a decade is an utter failure and really a farce. The exploitation is always more profitable than equity. And I heard something today on a podcast as I was coming over. When you're explaining, you're losing. And we have spent a lot of time explaining for people why people should have dignity, why people should have their safety, why people should have their freedom. And that is a losing stance. A lot of people are rightly very frustrated, very scared and disillusioned about what's happened and what is continuing to happen. And with the silencing of very famous white men like Jimmy Kimmel, for example, in the US, in workplaces, there's also a lot of fear about even raising the issue of DEI in the first place, lest people be retaliated against. So with that scene setting, I'm going to dig in and ask the first question, which is to say, given this climate where DEI has been scaled back, for those folks who are in workplaces where there was once a DEI function and stuff was happening, what should their role be now? Should they see this as kind of welcome clarity? Should they work with what they have and try and build upon it? How should they read this moment? Abele, I'm going to go to you.
So I can't hear myself think, but my mother always says that when people show you who they are, believe them. And I think that that's true of organizations as well. So essentially, I personally find it a moment of much welcome clarity. And by that I mean, no, Facebook doesn't care. I still remember being at Facebook in, I think 2016 or 2018, I can't remember who had been recently murdered. And there was a moment at Facebook where I remember the employees, we all rose up and someone had left Facebook and said, Facebook doesn't care about Black people. And I remember in that moment there was all of this uprising. Absolutely, that is not true, absolutely. And I think there's something refreshing in this moment about it being clear know that these organizations don't. And I think then the question then for people is, once you know that, or once we know that, what are we now called to do? So in my view, I think now you know what you're dealing with. You don't feel like you're gaslit. You know that the company has no interest in equity. You know the company has no interest really in inclusion or justice. So now, what are you called upon to do with that knowledge?
Yeah, Abba, what do you think?
I agree with that, and I really want to build on that. If I think of every team that I've been on in my tech career, Amazon, Groupon, Hotel Tonight, by virtue of being one of the few black people in the room, I was asked to do a lot of unpaid additional labor, whether that was starting the diversity network, running the anti-racism workshop, doing all of these extra things that probably weren't really grounded in any real desire to create systemic change, but instead were very optics-driven things. And I think in this brave new world where people are quite audacious in their white supremacy and patriarchy, there's almost a relief that you can enforce that boundary and be like, I'm not going to do that stuff because it's so performative and it's not worth my time or energy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Am I relieved that we're in this moment that we're in? Personally, probably not. I think I'm quite stressed. I think it is an extremely stressful political environment. I think a lot of people are afraid. I think people don't understand how to kind of respond to this current moment. And I think those are valid responses to what we're seeing. I perhaps think about it in context, right? It is always more difficult, I think, we can look historically, to kind of push for rights, to push for justice, and so on. And I think perhaps when we take a shorter time frame, we tend to think, oh, we won a little bit and that win is kind of secured. But actually, no, we have to kind of keep on fighting, we have to keep on pushing, we have to keep on resisting. And so I think my response, what should people do? I mean, I started out as an engineer. I sort of lasted in engineering companies for a handful of years before I was like, I think I'm unemployable. Somehow I keep pissing people off in the company and finding myself, benched for various reasons. And I have accepted that what I'm very good at is saying what needs to be said, and therefore I'm not very good at being employed, right? That's fine, that's my role. I think for every single person, you need to figure out, what are you very good at? Are you happy to kind of stand up and put your head above the parapet and understand that you might get beheaded and have to find another place to go? Or are you trying to sort of understand with great clarity what environment you're in and figure out a way to navigate through that? Are you going to be providing like a place for people to actually feel acknowledged in their fear and so on within your organization? Like, it is a more challenging environment, 100%. So there is this aspect of you have to look after yourself within that. And there is also this piece of, we have to keep fighting, ultimately. And fighting in whatever way works for you. Because if we don't, there is only one direction this goes and it's not good for us.
I think what's really scary, yes, 100%, I'm clapping that. It's a very challenging job market, and I feel a lot of people feel silenced in their ability to advocate for change in the workplace. A lot of the people that I used to work with who were leading DEI programs in startups and scale-ups were some of the first people to be laid off when restructuring and reorgs were on the horizon. And I think with that energy in the workplace, a lot of people are very much trying to kind of keep their head down, not challenge the status quo because they fear that it'll put a target on their back. And in many ways, I feel like that is the intention of that, far-right sentiment. It's to silence us and censor us so that we stop having these conversations, to make us feel like these conversations come at a cost. And it is deeply upsetting and it is deeply worrying. And I recognize the tension that you might therefore feel as a black person, minoritized in a team. Like, I want to hold them accountable, but I also don't want to lose my job.
100%. And I think this is, the hard thing, right? It's kind of like, you've got to pay your rent, you've got to whatever. Those are very, the material realities are real, the cost of living, etc., etc. I think personally one of the things I often think about is how honest we are with ourselves about what is true and what is kind of imagined, right? Is it the case that it is impossible to do something, or is it just very difficult? Is it the case that you will lose your job, or will you just make your coworkers uncomfortable? I think being able to kind of define for yourself a little more clearly what is possible within your environment is useful. But again, I haven't been employed by somebody for 10 years, so what do I know?
There's a whole host of reasons why many of us on this couch are unemployable. But I guess there was something, Abba, when we were having a discussion around, what we thought was important to highlight is the ways in which even when DEI had a bit more momentum, it was also used to describe all sorts of various terrible, dangerous, calamitous things, from train crashes, bank collapse. Everyone's like, oh, but that's the DEI. And just thinking about that, and that being the context, and then speaking up and being noticed, how is DEI being used in those contexts?
It's not new, and so first off, even you pull yourself back, it's not really DEI. I mean, what the language that's being used is to say that people who are minoritized are inferior. That's not new. So one of Ta-Nehisi Coates, one of the quotes I think in, I can't remember which book it was, but he says one of the functions of racism is to ensure that the least of them rule over the best of us. And so that's what that narrative is. That narrative is to have a lie that justifies the system of capitalism that we work under. So I think once you recognize that for what it is, and there's no need to be surprised that it has just sort of taken a new form, and that DEI is just essentially used to, when you think about it through history, you think about the notion that black people are lazy, when black people were working in the field for 20 hours, all of that is sort of the same. So I think recognizing that for the lie that it is a thing that helps, because you know where it's coming from.
I love that. I talk about this all the time. We're in a post-truth reality. We don't bother to fact check. We don't bother to verify. We consume snippets of information through TikTok or YouTube shorts. We take it as fact. We listen to influencers like they're journalists. Politicians have so little integrity. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Learning that these are harmful and, quite frankly, obvious narratives is a very powerful way to then deprioritize them in your consciousness and think that's just obvious BS.
Yeah, and there's something in what both of you are saying that makes me think of the power of language and how we can sort of reclaim that, right? So how can we talk about what's actually happening as not just kind of a DEI pushback, but how can we talk about it as the exertion of white supremacy, the kind of reinforcement of hierarchies that have ultimately led to death and genocide across the world, right? Let's not play about. Let's use language that they are afraid of, because the conversation around genocide, for example, there are multiple genocides happening in the world right now, including in Palestine, including in Sudan, and people are afraid to talk about that in their workplaces. Now, why all of this conversation about free speech, and yet we can't talk about genocide at work? What is that? So let's also think about how we can use language in ways that push back against what is going on, and the sort of political interests that I do think that being able to talk very clearly about what is happening around us is a vital part of them being able to do something about it, right? Because as Abadesi says, we live in this context where truth seems malleable, apparently. Truth depends on who is saying it, which is just not, it's factually incorrect. There are things that are real and there are things that are not. And yes, you can create narratives around that, and narratives are powerful, but being able to be very secure in our own positions about what is true, what isn't, allows us to gain some power, because it is about gaining power and building our own power bases.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like we need to have the confidence to ask for evidence too. One of the dominant themes I see in my client work now is we're doing anti-racism work, but what are we doing for white people? And I say, okay, well, show me the data that white people in this team, in this company, are suffering in some way, because the data that I've seen shows that they have the highest employee satisfaction rates. They've got the highest salaries in the company. They're overrepresented in leadership. So, I'm not saying people can't complain. People will always complain, but push back with the facts. And I think we need to be willing to push for the evidence of these things and not just take things at face value.
So DEI, the pushback against DEI is not new. It's just new language to describe very, very long histories and very long social phenomena. But DEI has also been used arguably as a cover-up tool and as a diversionary tactic, including for companies who do really, really bad shit in the world. They are able to DI their way out of accountability at times because they can point to their ERGs or that they've done some work on their recruitment process, for example. And I'd love us to think specifically about tech because we're at a tech conference, and specifically AI, given we're in like an AI heyday right now and there's a huge amount of hype. What is the danger actually of, I would say, like falling for this DEI trick when there are material harms being conducted by certain companies?
So I would say one of the things that, and this is something that I'm coming to as someone who's been in tech for many years, which is that there are some tables that you don't have to be sat at. So there's some tables that you should not be sat at because there's a big narrative around, well, if we just get more of us into positions of power, if we get more of us at the table, you're going to be in a position to make decisions. And so the question is, so equity justice is not just about getting a number of people of color in positions of power if the aim of that power is something that undermines people of color. So for example, I use this as an example. So slavery, I think we can all agree that was it's not good. So imagine if the narrative during slavery was, gosh, if we could just get more black people to be in the house, you know? Because then they could make decisions about the whippings. It sounds ridiculous, right? So I think a huge thing has to be like, what is your aim? When we're talking about diversity, when we're talking about equity, we're talking about justice, the aim is not quotas. The aim is not percentages of black people or of any minoritized identities. The aim is justice. And if ultimately the goal of a corporation or the goal of an industry is not justice, you have no business there. Unless what you're saying is, oh, I'm in a position to make different decisions. But what I would urge people to think, and I'm saying this is a conversation I'm having with myself as someone who is relatively senior, is how much of a difference did you really make? What is your intention as you're there? Be honest with yourself. If part of your intention is, oh, I need to pay bills, etc., then know that that's what you're there for. But the notion that you are in the middle of a business or of a system, of a true system of harm, and that being in charge, standing on the top of a pile of bones and saying that in some way that justifies your ancestors because you are now leading something that is ultimately harmful. That to me is not true liberation. And then really quickly on AI, generative AI. I've heard so many conversations saying, well, you know, black people, we need to be at the forefront of generative AI. I think there needs to be some thinking about what exactly is this. I think I would encourage people to read into the antecedents of generative AI, to learn about the test real bundle, to learn about transhumanism, to learn about some of the theologies that underpin it, that are connected to eugenics, that are connected to this real sense that there are certain superior people in the world who should be undergirded by technology, and certain people who are disposable, so people who will lose their jobs. So the notion that being at the forefront of something that is inherently violent, something that is inherently meant to undermine those who are minoritized, I think that it is a thing to think about.
Preach! Oh, we were just snapping the whole time.
I mean, what can I add to that? That point around transhumanism is absolutely fascinating. You know, you have people who are known racists, like Peter Thiel, who literally spent their time at college publishing eugenics-like books to try and prove the supremacy of white people, who grew up in apartheid South Africa, talking about the fact that they want to use AI to transcend human existence, live forever. I mean, this could be something out of Mein Kampf, okay? And fact check this, I'm not making it up. So I think you're absolutely right. Here we are, playing around with generative AI, potentially sleepwalking into oblivion, ultimately bankrolling these projects that do want our extinction. And I feel like I'm in a Black Mirror episode of Netflix, but I'm just quoting what I'm reading in the news.
100%. I mean, also, I think something that people forget is even in this moment, the sort of the global, like if we think about who are the people in the world that are hired to be moderators and to tag the data that goes into all of these models, for example. They tend to be in global majority countries, and they tend to be paid pennies, and they are exposed to the worst kind of visuals and language and so on. So even the creation of these models is kind of steeped in injustice. I personally, the number of my books, the number of my images that have been fed into these machines, I don't use any large language model. I don't want it. I don't want it in my life. I feel like everyone's just out here stealing my shit, frankly, and I'm not happy about it. I'm not happy about any of it, and I feel like we should all be more pissed off that old mate Zuckerberg and Bezos and the rest of them, Sam Altman, honestly, they just went out here and they were like, we don't care how much we have to pay in fines. We're going to hoover up all of the shit that everyone in the world created, and we're going to make money off it. We're going to make massive money off it, and we should be more pissed off about it. We should be more pissed. It's like theft at the global scale. And what are we seeing out of it? The fact we can just instead of Google, get someone to talk nice to us and ask us, what? We should be more pissed. And then secondly, on the other thing, right? I'm just out here. They were like, do you want to come and be on this panel? I'm like, yes, I'm going to rant to hundreds of people about shit I rant about every night. My husband's like, thank God she's doing it somewhere else, not at the dinner table. So I have to hear this every damn evening. But identity is not a set of values, right? Identity is not a set of values. Just because you are of a particular identity, it does not mean you have a particular set of values. Frankly, I'm from Sudan. Sudanese people are involved in war crimes, right? Just because someone's Sudanese, it doesn't make them have a good, believe in a sense of justice. If I was just like, we just need to get Sudanese people on the table. I remember somebody was once being like, oh, we should get more, whatever. I'm like, Haneti is Sudanese. Doesn't mean I like the guy, right? So let's be very clear about, that idea of you don't have to be at every table. I remember once being invited to a International Women's Day event at Raytheon, and they were like, we've got great sidewinders. I'm like, what on earth am I going to tell a missile-making company to make it any better? I don't care if women are involved in building the damn missiles. Are you out of your goddamn mind? Have you not heard anything I've said on the internet? Let's have some discernment, people. Let's have some shame. Honestly. Anyway, خلاص, I'm done. Honestly.
Yes, thank you. So, there should be no equal opportunity for death making, is one.
Correct.
No equal opportunities for death making. And my question was going to be, are some companies irredeemable? But the answer is yes, some companies are in fact irredeemable. And we need to be discerning about how we think we can utilize ourselves, and to what end, and through what methods. Okay, so I have always been really curious about why DEI functions proliferated and bloomed at the same time that union membership has been at some of its lowest levels in the UK and in the US. And so my question is, was DEI ever meant to succeed?
So no, and I think that question about unions is such an interesting question, because everyone knows if you have a historic scope, when you think of injustice, when you think of progress, the only thing that has ever worked is solidarity, and solidarity as in across multiple different groups. And if you think about the way tech worked, and as someone who's been in tech since 2000, I don't know, I'm old, 2006? I don't know. I started at Yahoo and Facebook, okay, and there was very much a narrative that if you worked in tech, you were somehow special. So you were different. You also felt very disconnected. So there were the people who were doing the content moderation. You didn't really engage with them. You didn't know who they were. There were the children in the Congo who were digging the cobalt. You weren't connected to them. But you were special. You had perks. You had childcare. You had shuttles to take you to work. And because you were focused on your identity in tech, you didn't think of yourself as part of a group of workers. I think what's interesting about, and I think DEI was part of that in the sense that it offered something, but it was something that was only specifically for people who were privileged workers. I think this moment in time where we're finding where DEI as a foil, or DEI as a, they don't need it anymore, right? So now I think when you're looking at, there's no job security in tech, there's layoffs all the time, I think there's a moment now, there's an opportunity for real solidarity. for people to think beyond your status as someone who's a privileged worker in tech and think, what actually makes this possible? Who's making the phones? Who's digging the cobalt? Do you have unity with them? And what kind of conversation should we be having across classes of workers? Because it is by separating classes of workers that exploitation is able to continue.
Oh yeah, yes. I mean, yes. I think DEI was not, created to succeed. I think dysfunction in many ways just removes a lot of the headaches that leadership don't want to deal with and creates, a source for people to go to with their complaints instead of unionizing, instead of pushing for a systemic change. It becomes something that defers the conversation or acts as an illusion to change. And I'm saying that as someone that literally was hired in 2020 to a 3,000-4,000 person company to lead on these initiatives, and I had a budget and I did the listening and I came with the strategy, and when it came to real material changes, it was very difficult to get that buy-in from leadership, and there was always an excuse. And when I left, someone on the leadership team said, I look back on it and I just feel like you were a fig leaf to all of our bad deeds, and that's so telling when someone on the leadership team is willing to admit that. So yeah, tech has a savior complex, and I feel like that's what Abele was building on. It has this real sense of idealism, like, wow, we're saving the world, we're building the future. I mean, yes, but a lot of people also work in tech because they want to make money. Look, I watched The Social Network, and I was like, that looks fun, and that looks like a lot easier way to get rich than what I'm doing in the city right now. And I think sometimes we need to be realistic. Like, if we are participating in systems for other people's profit, then we need to fight for our own, because to your point, it is inherently exploitative. It's not going to be fair. It's a profit-seeking system. Venture capitalists make these bets, hope for their 100, 1,000x return. We're all in a game, we're in that lottery, and it's a very, very deeply capitalistic, ultimately borderline immoral one.
Can I add something? Oh, yeah.
Well, go on.
Okay,
We've only got a few minutes left.
For me, the function of DEI was to depoliticize and to defang all of this, the idea of justice, right? How do you depoliticize justice? You make it really individual. You make it about individual people's achievement. You make it about, let's have a canapé event. You make it about these things that actually don't change the material reality. And I think, one thing I do want to say is I feel like a lot of people went in well-intentioned, but partly because they didn't have political education, partly because they didn't have political consciousness. So I hope what people get out of this moment is a sense of real political consciousness. And if that's what, I think that's what, if you kind of look historically again at movements that worked or that were successful, it's because they educated people at scale. And one of the things that I worry about now with, oh my god, whatever. Proliferation. Yes, the amount of slop, she's a writer, the amount of slop that exists in the world, that exists on our feeds, I think there is a risk that we lose or we forget the importance of a political education, a political consciousness, and understanding that solidarity is the way forward, and understanding that this is a political thing. Justice is a political thing. It is not something that you can just achieve and make everyone happy, right? Gaining and building power is political, and so trying to do that while gently still also trying to make your leaders happy at some point these things are mutually exclusive. Right, and again, it's about being honest with yourself. Is that what you're trying to do or not? And have that conversation. Just be real, as you say, be realistic, be honest about what is actually going on, so that you can kind of move forward with integrity.
Thank you. So we've got last question, folks. The political situation in this country is dire, and yes, you've already touched on that. We're not in a good place. Disabled folks are having their benefits regularly at risk of being stripped. There's violence towards migrants and folks of colour. Reproductive rights are, on the chopping block. The police continue to be violent, as is their point. That trans people are having their rights stripped away in real time. And DEI has been a failure, and it was always meant to be a failure, right? Even for those of us who are doing the work, it was never meant to succeed. So what is the work for those of us in corporations, in businesses? What's the work for in work, and what's the work for outside of work? This is our last question. You have like 20 seconds each, or they're going to cut off the mics. Tell us.
So one of the things I think is understanding that you're within a system. So it's not, to your point, it's not individual. And I think one of the things that I have found actually quite heartening is that if you look at our ancestors, it is a history of struggle. And so it sounds like a bummer, but that means that you have to decide which part of the struggle that you're taking on. And struggle means that there is no guarantee that in your lifetime you will see the impact. And that is what our ancestors have always done, but to struggle nevertheless. And so this notion is a very sort of narcissistic, sort of 20th century capitalistic, I'm gonna do a thing and I'm gonna see the impact. And that's actually very tech. I personally would do it myself. Solidarity and struggle, regardless of what happens in your lifetime, is the thing that's important. And I think the other thing is realizing that no matter where you are a political actor. So you're not separate from politics, and certainly in tech, where tech has really very much aligned itself with forces of harm, you remain a political actor, whether you like it or not.
100%. Just plus on that. The inside work is solidarity, find your people, push for transparency, and I think the outside work is fund movements that are challenging the status quo, put your money where your mouth is, and fund people that are fighting for change.
And I would also question the assumptions in whatever space you're in. If they're saying we have to build this technology, ask, do we have to do this particular thing? Why? What is it going to do? What are the impacts? Question the assumptions. We have to do it this way. Why do we have to do it this particular way? Because if we it baked into the assumptions in all of our different organizations, all of our different contexts, are all sorts of injustices and inequities. And if you can push people to at least start thinking them, or even challenge them yourself, I think some of that political education can make a transformative difference. And also, put your money where your mouth is. There are lots of organizations that are doing really impactful, powerful things that are struggling for money, struggling for resource. If you can, even if it is a small amount of your money that goes towards, I don't have an organization, so it's not a pitch for me, but genuinely, you can make a transformative difference for lots of different people if you invest in those grassroots movements that are building change for us all.
Thank you, Ava and Yasmin. Thank you all. You've been a wonderful audience. The panel is over, but I think the main thing to remember is nothing is inevitable and the power is in our hands, and nothing is apolitical, which means we all have a lot of shit to do. Have a lovely afternoon.
So with her eyes, live life, never worry about the prize. Big fire, I can see it in your eyes. Yeah, she was when I can't tell.
Wow, that was powerful. The power is in our hands, and we can ask questions, or we can question everything. So guys, there's going to be a few minutes break. We'll be back at 25 to, and we will be talking about building global brands for the future. I'll see you in a minute.
We can just walk around and see if there's any more. Hang on.
It's a massive man. Oh, you're coming here. Yeah, you're coming in.
It's coming out good on the app though. Yeah. It's not crystal clear because of the pixelation, but other than that, it's fine. I'm gonna walk around because there's other talks going on elsewhere. So I'm just gonna walk around with it.
anything to be the best what they can do. I think that's very important, especially what we do in Amsterdam. I mean, especially with Daily and you know, they're doing the same too. That's what I like about us.
That's amazing. So it's definitely round of applause. So important to give back to our own community and create opportunities as well. So Mabu, your motto is think outside, out of the box. Do you have an example of a risk or creative direction that embodies that, even if it didn't make sense to other people at the time?
So think out of the box, it means more or less to be free in the consideration what you have for your future. What can you consider to be? When we started, we were inspired by people that were around us, but that is not always the case for everyone. You don't always have people to look up to close to you. So with this mentality, it's to stimulate people to think in freedom from opportunity and to allow yourself to experiment, to make mistakes. There's so much pressure, especially in the industries that we're working in, tech, fashion, of results and a lot of high achievement. But the great and interesting stuff to me and to the brand is when you're daring something new, when you're experimenting, when you're thinking outside of the box. One of the examples that was very successful in the end for us, but didn't make sense at the time, is that we wanted to showcase our collection in a film that we produced in Ghana. While we've never produced a film, we were working with a director that never did a scripted film, but we feel like we need to show what we're inspired by, African film. We want to showcase the creatives that are around us and inspiring us, and think of new ways to showcase our collection. There's no return of investment in making this film because we're not showing in crazy cinemas. There's no tickets being sold, but it made people realize what inspires us and why this clothing means something, or at least the meaning that we're trying to put in there. Still, some of y'all might be like, what is the correlation between making a film that has nothing to do with fashion per se and showcasing that as a brand? Well, I don't have the answer, but there's a lot of joy in using that freedom and expressing the things that inspire you, basically.
Yeah, that's amazing. We're going to shift the conversation a bit now and talk about impact, collaboration and responsibility. You've all built amazing communities around your brand. How do you maintain that sense of belonging and inclusion in those communities, especially as you grow and expand?
First and foremost, collaboration should be a true partnership. It shouldn't be a one-sided approach. Also, for instance, like when you collaborate and you get inspired by a certain cultural heritage or a certain craftsmanship, you make sure that you include the people who originated it, people who basically are known for it. That's how you basically expand the horizon for everyone. And that's how we approach everything that we do. So, like, doing this brand, we learn so much about our background. We learn so much about all the different tribes in Somalia, in Morocco, and in Ghana, and all other 49 countries in Africa. It's like, we learn so much just through fashion. And because we don't know it all, it's very, very, very important that when you work, when you get inspired by certain countries or whatever, you make sure you include the local talents. You make sure that they are seen, they're heard, and you make sure their story gets translated in an abstract, modern way, so that people out here in the Western society can gravitate towards it in a very natural way. And that's what we've been doing over the years. I have to be honest, I didn't get the question.
So you've all built communities and inclusion. That community, especially as your brand also grows bigger and bigger.
That's a good question. I think one of the things is that especially as a brand, there needs, in my opinion, needs to be a balance between things that are profitable and things that you strive for, which doesn't exclude it being profitable, but you create a domain where there's a dialogue possible with people from outside, where it's possible to try out new things that for example, this film, that don't have a return of investment, but do get a lot of people involved that wouldn't necessarily buy the product or be able to understand what we're doing. Authenticity is also what Edson was saying, something that we bring into the room rather than that we have to remember to keep. In a way, that's a mentality. It's not the truth, but it's something that builds confidence and that will inspire.
Thank you. Edson, you founded Pata Academy to mentor young creatives. Why is this important to you, and what impact have you seen through your academy and the work that you're doing?
It's just the investment. We as Pata, we love to invest, especially now. To be fairly honest, like I'm 53, so I play the end game. I'm in the end zone. So for me now, it's to give the torch to the younger generation. And we do that already in our own company, but also with the Pata Academy. It started like 5 years ago. A friend of mine asked me to do a talk in the Southeast. I did it. He's like, yo, you want to start like an academy, like a summer school? And then I was thinking like, oh, why not? I mean, like, it's always good to have the youth represent you and pass the torch to them. So I started the academy, and then without funding from the local authorities, so no government, I just looked at all the partners that we already had, and I asked them, not even asked them, I almost demanding them, like, do you want to do impact? Just like Jefferson said, if you do like a collabo, they need to return also their goods or whatever to them. So now we just founded an academy where we basically have a bank is sponsoring us and not only giving the money, but they're also teaching those kids about finance. How does it work with finance? And if they have a great idea, then the bank is obligated, not obligated, they need to fund that project. That's the contract that we have with them for 5 years. We have like a lawyer firm. One of the biggest law firms in Amsterdam is called DLA Piper. DLA Piper does the same. If you get a contract, they will read it for you, pro bail or pro bail. So that means no cost. They will read your contract, get all the angles out, and negotiate for you that deal. That's how they do it. Plus they need to, of course, give money for our academy. And I can keep on because we have like 6 or 7 of those sponsors. Not only they're going to give us the money, but they also need to invest with their knowledge, with their network, with their presence, with their facilities. That means that I don't have to wear suit and tie. We just come into anywhere we go. And I think that's very important for especially young kids to see like, oh, this is also feasible. This is also doable by the same guys that comes on our block, hanging out, shooting dice and drinking Hennessy or whatever, but still represent all layers of life. Because we're all human at the end of the day, and we need to all invest in youth, basically.
That's super inspiring.
Thanks.
Malu, SMI BTNO Fest has become a cultural moment for young people in Amsterdam. Why is it vital to create spaces and not just products?
I think as a brand, obviously the product is one of those tangible things that people can tap into, be part of what you're creating. Though that product stands for something, it means something, and the brands that we have, we put a lot of effort in that meaning. The product on its own can move, but what we're building, I think, is an establishment that inspires, and those establishments, they need physical spaces. They need, you need to see the people mobilize. The power of mobilizing people is such a, it's underestimated within our community how powerful that actually is, the access that we are able to give to investors and then mobilize people. Those spaces and ownership in those spaces, they will stand as a symbol of the things that we're building. Those people that will see that building, they will see the tangible side of it. And the reason why that space is important is to not be a thought, a spirit. You want to be something physical that can last, that can stay. And those spaces, they are crucial in anchoring those values in our establishments.
Thank you. So Jeff, daily paper reads African heritage into a modern narrative. How do you ensure that these stories are told with depth and not just design aesthetics?
Yeah, as I kind of touched upon early on, we do a lot of research and we collaborate a lot with the local creatives, either if it's a photographer, a graphic designer, and we lean towards a certain narrative in a way to push it forward, to offer a platform for that specific culture that we get inspired by. And from there on, you create an art direction that fits the whole concept and that creative or artistic direction. And that's how it transcends globally, because we put the daily paper touch up on it and make sure it's accessible for the diaspora globally. And even if you're not from African descent, you can still relate to it. Because it's a celebration of cultural identity. It's a celebration of generational heritage in a contemporary way.
Thank you. We've only got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to move to the last question. If someone wrote one sentence about your brand's legacy 20 years from now, what would you want it to say?
A celebration of cultural identity with fashion as a catalyzer, offering a platform for all people from different backgrounds, ethnicities, beliefs.
Maru?
Well, obviously that it was fresh, that it was relevant, necessary, but relatable. I hope people experience that something relatable that they can move further with.
I mean, for us, it's real simple, like out of necessity, learning and profit and margins. That's what we do, because it's a long game, it's a long run. Whenever I'm done, whenever I'm finished, whenever I'm under the ground or whatever, the next generation will keep on going with the Pata spirit, with the Amsterdam spirit, with the, daily baby spirit, Tino spirit, to keep on going. We are creating new leaders. And I think that's the very most important thing for us as a group.
Just want to say thank you. These are not just global brands, they're legacy building, impactful brands. Can we give a round of applause for our panel?
like this one, but I don't think there's any, now there's the in-between time.
I really don't know what's going on.
way she dressed, probably it doesn't give off.
size from that. It really depends on the food. They love it.
They're coming in about 5 minutes so. Yeah.
Can you hold this for me, please?
Yeah, but
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
You right?
Fine.